Welcome to Knit Locally, and this is our video on how to choose yarn for your next sock project and the size needles. This is not going to talk about the type of needle, whether it's wood or metal, or which method, whether we're talking magic loop or double points. That's actually in a different video. What we're going to talk about today is how to choose the yarn, and then how to choose which size needles for your first sock project. So let's talk about the yarn for a second. So all of these here are fingering weight yarn that is appropriate for socks. And so, but each of them is going to give you a slightly different gauge. And one of the things to keep in mind is with the different gauge is probably going to affect the size needles that you're going to want to use. So what I like to do first personally is I like to choose my yarn, and then I sort of let that dictate what size needles I'm going to choose. So one of the first things I look at is how many yards I'm getting in each skein. So each one of these four is 100 grams skein, and this one here is 115 gram skein. So this skein here is 100 grams, and I am getting 400 yards. This skein here is 100 grams, and I'm getting 463 yards. This is 100 grams, and I'm getting 438. And this one is also 438, though it's not labeled. And this one is my 115 gram skein, and I'm just going to confirm, getting 443, which means I'm actually getting slightly less than 400 yards in 100 gram skein. And so what that tells me is that each of these yarns is going to be slightly different in their thickness, and that's going to affect gauge. So if I'm knitting this yarn on a size 1 needles, it's actually a thicker yarn, so I'm going to get more stitches per inch, or actually less stitches per inch. I'm so sorry, less stitches per inch, whereas this yarn is a lot thinner, so I'm actually going to get more stitches per inch. And so that's going to affect the gauge, how many stitches I'm going to cast on. And again, we're talking about a sock, so this is not going to be huge. We're not knitting a sweater out of it, but it will affect whether you want to cast on, say, 64 stitches or 72 stitches. And so something to think about. I do recommend, if you are brand new to sock knitting, never knitted before, go into your first sock with a little bit of zen, right? Like, go ahead, try it, see what happens, see how you like your gauge. Some people like looser socks, some people like tighter socks, but I would also just get a feel for it. The other thing I would recommend is gauge swatching. Not to get too crazy about it, because I'll demonstrate in a minute the difference between a size 1 and a size 1.5 needle and how that affects your gauge. But I would definitely say gauge swatch. This yarn here, which is my 463, is going to give me a very different gauge than this yarn here. Both will make beautiful socks. Both will be incredible to wear, and they can be both knit on the same size needle. If I'm knitting this one, which again, less stitches per inch, I'm actually going to get a denser sock. This one, if I'm knitting, say, the same 64 number, this I'm going to get actually a little bit of a drapier, looser sock. So it's all going to depend on what you're looking for in your sock. The pattern that we're talking about in our knit along right now, the Rose City Rollers, which is by Orange Knit Designs, and I love her patterns. These are perfect for athletic socks. I wear them when I go to the gym, and I will use a very tight twist yarn, actually Round Mountain, I love their yarn, so I will use their tight twist and make these socks, wear them to the gym. They wear really well. It is also a slightly thicker yarn. Again, I'm getting 400 yards for 100 gram skein, so it will make a slightly thicker sock, which is great in my athletic shoes. It's not so great in my dress shoes. So the other tip I have is knit the socks you love, and then decide how that fits in with your everyday wear. I actually wear clogs quite frequently, and what I will do is specifically buy a size or a half size up in my dress shoes that I know I'm going to wear with my hand knit socks. And that gives me room to wear the nice socks that I love, show them off, but also gives my feet room. I cannot wear them with my regular everyday shoes because the socks just end up being a little too thick for what I'm used to. hand knit socks will be a lot thicker than commercial socks. That's okay, except for athletic socks. That's why I can wear my the Rose City Roller pattern socks with my tennis shoes because I already have a little bit of room in there. My athletic socks are really thick. So once you choose your yarn, how do you decide which needles? So what I do is I knit now quite a few socks, and I like 64. So I like, it fits my foot really nice. Kind of no matter which yarn, I can pretty much make it work. And I know the math. So for me, I know how many cast on for the toe, how many cast on for the heel. I am a very lazy knitter, so a lot of it is just pretty mindless, increases, decreases. I'll do a short row heel. I know what the math is on that. I don't have to worry about it. And so for me, I like to keep my socks at 64 stitches rather. Having said that, if I'm knitting for, say, my dad or my husband, they have bigger feet than I do. So what I will do is I just increase my needle size. And that's sort of a cheater method, right? So it gives me more stretch in my yarn, and it gives me a slightly bigger sock without having to change my math. So I still can keep it mindless, I can still keep my math the same, but I actually don't have to mess with my stitch count. So for me, that's an easy method. If I was gonna do pretty dress socks that I wanted to be delicate and maybe do lace, and that I would use actually the thinner yarn and still use my smaller needles, and that would actually give me a little bit of a drapier sock with the same 64 stitch count. Hopefully that makes sense. So a little bit of a demonstration. So with these needles, this is for our double point demonstration, but I'm actually using a 2.5 because that's what I have. And it's what my double points I will usually use for. Now, having said that, my flexi flips are 2.25. And that's okay because I'm doing 2 socks on 2.25 and 2 socks on 2.5. And at the end, I'll show everybody the slight difference. But what happens, and I don't know if we'll be able to see it in this video, but as we go on, we'll be able to see it. Right now, I have knit 15 rows, and that's why I said it's really important to count rows and not necessarily inches. That way each one is the same. So if you look at one row, one sock and one sock, I am like 2 rows difference between the 2.5 and the 2.25. And that just goes to show how the sock can be slightly bigger, although I will tell you, wearing it, you would probably not notice a difference. But so again, if I was using a smaller yarn, that would sort of affect my overall length of my sock, width of my sock. And again, bigger yarn, I'm gonna get a bigger sock. So something to keep in mind, this is a situation where if you're not a gauge swatcher, if you wanted to just take a chance on your first sock, go with, say, a size 1 needle and see how you go. I will say some people, there's no reason why you couldn't go up to a size 2 or even maybe a 3 or a 2.5 rather, probably a 2.5 needle while you're knitting socks if you're a very tight knitter. I have some former students who are very tight knitters, and it would not surprise me if they had to go up to a 2.5 or about a 3mm needle to knit socks, just because they're very tight knitters. Having said that, I also have a colleague who really cannot knit socks because, I mean, she can, but it's very hard for her because she is such a relaxed knitter that even doing it on a size 0, she still cannot get a tight enough gauge to make a sock work. So I also have a prolific sock knitter friend of mine who knits no matter what on the same size needles with the same size yarn because it's what she loves, and they fit who they fit, and it's okay. And if they don't fit her, she'll gift them. If they're too big, she'll gift them. If they're too small, I have gotten a couple pair of her socks. So I think it's just one of those things that if you like what you like, go ahead and just knit what you like, or gauge swatch it if you're concerned. I will also say that once I gauge swatch with a particular needle and yarn, that maker, that dyer rather, then I typically don't have to do it again. So I'm very familiar with working like actually with all of these yarns, and I know what my gauge is going to be and what my density is going to be. So once I've done that, I don't have to gauge again. It's not typically like a sweater. Typically it's just once with that new yarn, and you can sort of keep doing it the same each time. Anyway, I hope that's helpful. There is another video that discusses each method, whether it's magic loop, flexi flips, double points, and hopefully that can help you decide which method to choose. This was just sort of an overview of, you've decided to knit socks, which yarn should I look for, and then which size needle. So anyway, thank you for watching.